All my life, I've longed to get into filmmaking, to recreate shots from the historical epics that we all saw in the early 2000s, and what a glorious period in cinema history that was. But as the years went by and I got my first camera at the age of 20, there was a problem. Everything was suddenly digital, crisp, sharp to the tiniest of details, all polished to perfection in such a way that my camera has better eyesight than I do now I have hit 30. Still, better than nothing of course, it kept me busy after all. But alas, behind those digital pixels there was no life, no magic, no soul. I thought I was doomed to shoot digital for my whole life. Until I got an email from Dehancer, and they asked if I could film their film emulation plugin. Could this be it? Could this be the solution to my digital problem? I answered that email to the tune of, "Bring me that plugin." So now, I'm going to tell you all about it. Right, so, to start off, Dehancer, in its most basic form, is a film emulation plugin which converts your digital footage into looking like it was recorded on glorious analog film stocks. The plugin is also available in DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro, and also Adobe After Effects, so they kind of got the bases covered for everybody. I'm personally using Adobe Premiere Pro, so there will be a tutorial on how to use it in Adobe Premiere Pro, but that will be in a separate video. But from what I've seen with the plugin working on other editors, it all works pretty much exactly the same. There's only like a few little key differences here and there. It's mostly UI stuff, but for the most part, it's exactly the same across all editing software. The plugin also works on Rec 709 and Rec 2020, but it also has a ton of camera input profiles for you to use. To name a few camera brands that they have the input profiles for, they have Sony, DJI, Panasonic, Arri, so on and so forth. I think they even have Canon on there as well. And then once you're done with the camera input profile, we can then select up to 63 different film stocks after you're done with the camera input profile. And some of the stocks that you will find on there you might actually be familiar with from movies that you might have seen over the years, especially Oppenheimer from Christopher Nolan. So now you actually get the chance to play around with Kodak Vision 3 500T and also Kodak Vision 3 250D, which are coincidentally also the same film stocks that we used to film Oppenheimer. You can actually find tons of articles about it. I'll leave one linked from Kodak's website, but it's quite an interesting story. I'd recommend reading it actually. Now, one could very fairly argue that a film emulation plugin will never truly replicate the look and character of recording to actual film stocks. And to be fair, you might even be right about this, but not many of us have a couple €1,000 just lying around somewhere to buy a ton of film stocks for a project that we're working on, so this is really not in the budget for any indie filmmaker. With Dehancer, you pretty much get almost the exact same result, and it is freakishly close. You might not even notice the difference at all, and I'm certain that untrained eyes will definitely not notice if you used actual film stocks or Dehancer. So when it actually comes to filming to film stocks or just paying a couple €100 for Dehancer, I would honestly pick Dehancer out of my tool chest any day. We're going to talk about hardware in a second, but I have to mention first that there is also an iOS app, and I can't tell you much about it because I've been meaning to try it, but I haven't done so yet. And I don't know if the Android version is in development at the moment or if they're even making a Android version of the app. So Dehancer, if you're watching this, and I assume you will be, maybe a blog post about an Android version would be very nice to have. Now, let's talk about hardware. Dehancer is no walk in the park. It can get very intensive on your GPU, and I'm using an RTX 3080. That thing is no joke when it comes to editing videos in 4K, 5.3K. I'm pretty sure it can also do 6K. And for the most part with Dehancer, you only really run into problems with the rendering time once you start getting into all the bells and whistles. And by bells and whistles, I mean the gate weave and the film breath. These two tools in Dehancer can really extend the rendering time that is needed if you're exporting. Bloom and Halation, yes, Bloom and Halation are also in there. They aren't too GPU intensive, but I have found that the more bells and whistles you add to your clips when using Dehancer, the more rendering time it needs to actually export a project finally. Now, if I'm doing a very big production, like, I don't know, a short movie, then for me this is forgivable because I obviously want my production to be exported with all the fancy bells and whistles, and it has to look absolutely perfect for me. But if you're a content creator and you need to dish out reels every single day, maybe even twice a day, and you then have to deal with the extra rendering time, then this might not be completely for you because of the extra rendering time. I did try it for a couple reels, and I had to stop using the gate weave and the film breath because the rendering time was just too long, especially even for reels. So yeah, bear that in mind. Okay, now let's move on to who Dehancer is actually for. If you're a filmmaker of any kind, well, no matter what your niche is, I would say this is a very valuable plugin to have in your tool chest, especially if you're trying to pursue more cinematography in your work. It's instant cinematography magic when you use this plugin. If you make short or long films, like I mentioned a little earlier, then this is definitely for you, because if you make short or long films, like I mentioned a little earlier, then this is definitely for you, I think, because you don't have to go out and rent an Arri Alexa, which is like, I don't know how much, to 10,000 euros a day or something. I don't know. Don't quote me on that, by the way. I have no idea what it costs to rent. I only know how much it costs to buy, not to rent. And by contrast, if you just use a Sony FX3 paired with Dehancer, then I think you will do just fine until you have a huge film production company and then you can afford all this stuff. But until then, yeah, Sony FX3 plus Dehancer and you're good to go. And for content creators, I think this entirely depends on your niche, like the type of content that you're creating. I don't think vloggers would make too much use of this tool, since you're pretty much always just running and gunning when it comes to filming, and most of the time you're filming yourself with a camera in your hands pointed to yourself. There's a ton of movement and everything. There's no real focus on cinematography here, so I don't think it'll be useful for vloggers. But on the other hand, if you as a creator have gone out of your way in the past to try out color grading, try out different angles to make your video look more cinematic, then I would say this is definitely for this type of creator. Or at the very least, it's something for you to consider. Now, the price. At the time of filming, Dehancer Pro costs $449 for a lifetime license, which it is a bit pricey, but I can help you here, because if you use the discount code TheAlexander10, you get a nice 10% discount on whatever license you want to buy. Full disclosure, I also would get a 10% commission if you use my discount code, and this would help support the channel to a great extent as I go about making these more production heavy videos, shall we call them. Now, to close off the video, I would like to give you my personal thoughts about Dehancer and whether or not I would recommend it. I'll cut to the chase. Dehancer has changed the entire filmmaking game for me. I really never thought I would ever have the opportunity to shoot something with my digital cameras and then put it in post-production and export it in a way that that footage now looks like it was recorded to analog film stocks. And although it's still not the real thing, I think it's pretty damn close. I also find myself filming a lot more than I usually do nowadays, and I'm also coming up with so many different angles nowadays that I never would have considered before, because I'm just excited about how the clip will look in post-production once it's exported, because to be completely honest, I really can't get enough of it. Dehancer, it's put my dream workflow within my reach in ways that I never thought possible, and what can I say? I'd love it. I absolutely love it. Now, I do have to say, however, there isn't a great deal of information about how to use Dehancer on Dehancer's website. I actually had to find tutorials, information, and resources in general, mostly from fellow creators that are also reviewing this plugin. However, I did see that Dehancer have a blog and they do post some resources on there, but it would be nice in the future to see them posting more about tutorials, how to use certain tools, or how to use the plugin in general. Hopefully, we will see more of this information there in the future. If it wasn't obvious at this point, then yes, I would definitely recommend Dehancer, but it really depends entirely on what kind of work you're doing and really how much flexibility in time you have for your projects. Now, that's the end of this review video for now. Now, I will have a tutorial coming up in the near future, how to use Dehancer properly. I will also have another one of my classic film reels where I just show off a ton of footage, but this time with Dehancer applied. I'm very curious how that's going to turn out actually. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope it helped you, and I'll see you shortly in the tutorial.